Hi, everybody. It's time to now meet Michelangelo as a painter. Now, this is surprising because was not a part of his plan. You know, we've seen a couple of examples of his sculpture, and his intent was to keep on doing sculpture. That was his thing. That's what made him happy. But when a project down in Rome, sculpting a tomb, kind of stalled out, the Pope at that time kind of coerced Michelangelo and said, you know what, if you're interested in continuing to find work here down here at the Vatican, more sculptural projects, I need you to take care of something in my favorite chapel. And let's go to our PowerPoint now to find out what I'm talking about. I bet some of you already know. Moving on here, you can see a view of the Vatican, and we'll be taking a look at the architecture of the famous large church there, St. Peter's Basilica. But first, we're going to visit a little small chapel that you can also find on the campus, so to speak, of Vatican City. And it is the Sistine Chapel. There you go. So it has nothing to do with St. Peter's Basilica. It is a smaller chapel. As you can see, it's just a more diminutive brick building from the outside. Nothing special, but it's when you get inside that you find this incredible array of frescoes that Michelangelo painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel here. So all of this art down below, it existed previously. The Pope Julius II, is the one who commissioned him to paint the ceilings. He's also going to come back later and tackle the back wall, the altar wall, but we'll hold off on that till after I walk you through the ceilings. Okay, so fortunately he chose the right medium fresco for its durability, but had to quickly school himself, if you will, on that technique. It was challenging. You know, we are looking at a pretty, high ceiling. It's more than 65 feet off the ground. You can imagine the scaffolding that would require Michelangelo to tackle the project. The theme is complicated. He has painted more than 300 figures that tell the story of creation, the fall of mankind, and subsequent redemption. So the story of creation, the fall of mankind, and subsequent redemption as well. So it's complex, it's difficult to access. So that sort of explains the span of years from 1508 to 1512, the demand of time on the part of Michelangelo to complete the project. And there's some anecdotes of him being famously grumpy and throwing a can of paint at one point. There's an old movie I'll link you to that is supposed to reveal that scene to the viewer. But yeah, I think I'd be a little cranky too if I had paint dripping on my face for almost 5 years. In any event, the span of the place, or the ceiling, is pretty long too. It's about 128 feet in length by about 45 feet across. So there is a lot going on there. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to sort of focus down the center row. There are 9 scenes here painted in rectangular format, and then there's a lot of illusionistic cornices and architecture, columns that feature other Old Testament figures and scenes of Jesus's kind of family tree, that kind of thing. We're going to let that go. What's really the theme of the fall of or the story of creation, the fall of mankind, and subsequent redemption plays out almost like a PowerPoint slideshow as you move from one end of the chapel ceiling to the other. Let's take a look at some other slides here. There's sort of the dizzying view. This gives you a sense of the dizzying heights, the vertigo I would get if I had to work up that high, painting those frescoes on the part of Michelangelo. Zooming in, you can see what I'm talking about. These are the scenes that are painted that reveal the themes that I have already delineated out. Here's one that you might recognize. We'll not focus on this, but you might recognize, of course, Adam and Eve, the expulsion from paradise. Here's the serpent with the apple, handing it sort of the before and the after. So, of course, the whole idea of, man's, youthful folly and temptation to sin is kind of illustrated by Michelangelo in that scene. The scene we're interested in, though, and discussing in regard to the Sistine Chapel is this one. This is the most famous one, called Creation of Adam. Let me just remove myself for a second so you can see the full title here. This is, again, you're looking up more than 65 feet, way up there. Composition is very important. Clarity is very important. You can't have a mural like Raphael's philosophy mural, with, a pantheon of figures, it's too complex, it's too busy. This is the beauty and mastery of an artist who, of course, began his whole artistic training as a sculptor. So, as a humanist, you can see some influences going on here, too, that I'll point out. So, as you might know, the whole idea is Adam was created before Eve, right? Man was created by God. So God is on the right, Adam is on the left, in a kind of heroic nude presentation. That's not surprising for Michelangelo, right? Think Michelangelo's David, or his Pieta statue as well. These artists are looking to the classical world for inspiration, and so it's not surprising to see Adam in that way, although traditionally Adam is often depicted even with Eve in the nude, in sort of this, innocence before shame kind of period, right? He is laying on kind of a primeval field, kind of like a primeval earth. It's not anything that's well developed as a landscape. Kept, again, very simple. And then what you find kind of opposite is another kind of mass of, instead of an earthen field, we have an heavenly descent of God, kind of wrapped in a billowy fabric, surrounded by his kind of retinue of angelic and heavenly beings as well. So take a look at God, though. I mean, with that beard and that flowing hair, he looks almost like Zeus, the kind of the head of the Greek mythological Olympian gods. Perhaps that is something that might have entered Michelangelo's mind. Perhaps that's just conjecture on my part. But as the two gentlemen, again, the power of glance, the power of gesture, the center of the composition is this famous touch. Again, the spark of life between God, again, almost like tapping, like a light switch, giving life to Adam. Famously stolen in, Steven Spielberg's E.T., the extraterrestrial movie. So if you want to check that out some Saturday afternoon, you might recognize the extended finger scene in that movie. What you also find linking the two gentlemen, besides gesture and glance, is the positioning of their bodies. You see how Adam's body is kind of presented in an arc, a slight curve that's mirrored or matched by God's positioning of his body. So together they kind of compositionally complement each other, linking each other in this scene of when God creates man. Also very interestingly is noting the gesturing of God's left hand. So what you see here is a woman under the crook of his arm, and then there's a baby that seems to be more significant than these other kind of angelic types that you see in this scene. Um, for a while, scholars thought, well, maybe that's Eve. Here's Adam, perhaps that's Eve. She's coming next down the pipeline, so to speak, of what God is going to create when he creates woman. But now the thinking of scholars is that she is likely Mary and the baby is likely Jesus. Now, that's way fast forward in time from when Adam supposedly existed and once created, right? Adam is part of the story of creation, very kind of the early, like Old Testament, even, the earliest description of humanity after God created Earth, right? But when you think about the timeline implied and the notion in another scene there on the Sistine Chapel that he and Eve will, be part of the fall of mankind when again they were tempted and therefore enter into an era of mankind being sinful. Following that implied timeline, embodied in the extended arm of Adam as it meets the extended arm of God, then traveling through the other extended arm of God to this gestured finger pointing to baby Jesus. It's as if telling the viewer, because of what happens with Adam and Eve, eventually God will have to sacrifice his own son for mankind's salvation and redemption. So again, with a very simplistic, minimalist composition, without a lot distracting in the background, right? We have a core message going on here in Michelangelo's creation of Adam, about the consequences of sin, and ultimately a reminder to the viewer about the sacrifice that was necessary to be made on the part of Jesus. All right, that's it for Michelangelo's creation of Adam, a fresco, one of the many panels to be seen on the incredible masterpiece that is the Sistine ceiling. Just to show you, like Leonardo, Michelangelo did his homework. He didn't rely on just his knowledge in sculpture. There are a myriad of sketches and drawings. There was a fantastic exhibit at the Getty Center of these drawings, some of which were used to create the Sistine Chapel. So check those out online. I'll try to link that for you. There's a little close-up of the magic moment, right? The most famous meeting of hands in art history. And then I just wanted to show you very quickly that for the longest time, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel was quite dark and smoky looking, as if like almost in the aesthetic of Leonardo da Vinci. And for the longest time, people thought, well, Michelangelo was kind of a moody, dark, brooding personality, and so his palette was sort of dark and moody and stormy too, right? And then with some conservation techniques that began in the 1980s, they started to clean the frescoes of all of this candle smoke, pollution, some lacquer that was applied at some point to kind of fix some problem areas, but ended up just darkening the entire ceiling and all of its beautiful paintings. And so when they started cleaning, look at that. You have a palette that has less to do with Leonardo and has a look that's more like what you see with Raphael. So there you have it. Kind of an amazing awakening in scholarship. It was very controversial, but people have come to accept the fact that this truly is the palette of Michelangelo. And some quick close-ups of additional scenes. All right, coming up next, we're going to meet that back ceiling, the altar wall of Michelangelo's fresco program in the Sistine Chapel. So be sure to click on the next video. I'll see you in just a minute.